Mother, man.
Spreading faster than a case of the clap in a trailer court. Able to shatter eardrums within a 666-mile radius. A podcast more brutal than all the rest. It's Murder Metal Mayhem! Okay, we have the privilege to be doing an interview with Dr. Katherine Ramsland, a writer and professor of forensic psychology. She's on just about every serial killer documentary out there, but somehow found the time in her schedule to talk to us here at Murder Metal Mayhem. I've got my co-host Chris Shaw back here with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramsland. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I thank you for having me back on the show.
Thanks again for doing the interview with us, and we're going to be doing an upcoming episode on spree killers, and I know you recently published a book on the subject. Can you tell us how that came about and tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, the book actually was almost accidental. It wasn't something you're planning, but this all kind of started for me when the FBI in 2005 decided to no longer use the nomenclature spree killers for one of the classifications of multicides or multiple murders. And they thought the reason they were doing that is because they didn't think it really had any practical use for law enforcement. As teaching criminology and forensic psychology, I could see that there was still a lot of good reason to retain the spree killer category. So I used to speak with Mark Safaric, a former FBI profiler, who was one of the organizers of the conference where this new development occurred. And we used to talk about it because he actually disagreed with the outcome of that symposium, and he writes all about that in the first chapter of this book. He agrees with me that spree killer does have some practical use for law enforcement. And then this case happened in 2018 of Dwight Layman Jones in Arizona. And Mark and I, and I'll tell you the details in a minute, but Mark and I at the same time, really on the very same day, thought, oh, there it is. There's the case that proves our point. And anyway, the case is that forensic psychiatrists had been killed in a parking lot, Stephen Pitt, in Arizona. And then the next day, 2 people were killed at law offices. And then another person was killed at the offices of a life coach. And it was very clear to people who knew Dwight Layman Jones that this is all related to him and a contentious divorce from his wife. And so they were able to, and also she got full custody of their son. So they were able to call law enforcement and say, we believe we know who is responsible for these 3 murders over a period of 3 days, and we know where he lives, and you should go, get him. And they did. He committed suicide at the scene. I'm really condensing the story for you, but he committed suicide. Sure. But essentially, because they were warned and alerted, and somebody was able to put together that this was an anger-targeted type of series of murders, they were able to stop him. And clearly he had more people on his list because he had put up a bunch of YouTube rants about all the people he held responsible for how his life had crashed and he'd lost custody of his son and whatnot. Clearly he was going to go after his ex-wife and her new husband, who happened to be the one who put this together because he was also her former bodyguard. And so that case, we both immediately, I wrote a blog saying, this is why the FBI is wrong. And Mark called me. And then all of a sudden we started looking around for more cases. We put together 25. And then we realized, no one's ever categorized spree killing the way they've done for mass murderers and serial killers, which are the other 2 aspects of the nomenclature of multicide. And so we started thinking, could we could we look at these cases and try to figure out categories? So we started really looking. And I think we built up 100 cases, and really started seeing that they are categorizable, and those that have practical value for law enforcement are in some specific categories. So we figured if we could, form a sort of program where we could divide up those kinds of cases that would be useful to law enforcement away from those cases that aren't useful to them, such as murder in tight locations where they just can't get there in time. That we could actually do a training program for law enforcement, which is the last chapter of the book, showing when they understand the type of killing they have, as in the Dwight Layman Jones case, that they actually can mobilize quickly and perhaps save some lives and stop and identify the person quickly, as happened in that case and other cases. We also have a few more examples in the book as well where this happened. So it was very exciting for us. The book is essentially an argument to the FBI and law enforcement that spree killers is in fact a viable category with multiple subcategories, and that they can in fact prepare to respond to something like this if they understand the signals. So it was really, and we never expected it was going to go into a book, but by the time, we amassed all these, we started looking at other countries. We ended up with 43 countries, wow. 349 cases involving 419 killers.
Wow.
and 7 categories. And we ended up, having way more than we ever expected we were going to, but it's the largest database of anyone in the world of spree killers, and it's also the only one that is fully analyzed for all different kinds of data. So there's an entire chapter on informatics for spree killers that no one else has ever done. So I think we ended up, just because of this one case, we ended up having something that we think makes a real contribution to law enforcement. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's how it happened.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting, Katherine. What about, is it exclusive? I mean, I know it's not exclusive, that's the wrong word, but much more prevalent in the United States with these spree killers. And why is that? What is it about us that makes us more prone to such things?
Well, we're a huge country. That's one thing. Also, I think it's always hard to make comparisons from one country to the next, in part because of the way cases get recorded, investigated. We even came up against some countries who just wouldn't release any information about a particular incident. So sometimes we had trouble getting that. And I think we didn't start out thinking we were going to do an international overview. So we really concentrated on the cases that were readily available to us. So this is in no way is this book, despite being loaded with cases, in no way is this book exhaustive of all the cases in the world. Sure. But that being said, I would agree that we these in part because they've been mixed with a lot of the what we would call mission-oriented mass and spree killings for terrorism purposes.
Right. Okay.
So that's in itself a whole different thing. But we have had a lot of the terroristic kinds of things, and also school violence, workplace violence. In part that has to do with media coverage, because
definitely.
You always get, no matter what happens in media, when they cover any incident, you'll always get people who become copycats or want to one-up that. If it's a big case like the Las Vegas shooting, they want to one-up the person. So anytime you have media coverage, you're always going to trigger other potential cases, and we have a number of those actually in the book where that has happened. So because we have such widespread media coverage and pretty free in terms of naming and giving out details in ways some other countries just don't have, we certainly have more of these shootings. Plus, I mean, I'm going to say it, and I know everybody hates this, but we have much more readily available weapons for this.
Sure.
Many of these people used guns, much more so. And that's not to say, spree killing can't be used. It can't have other things. We had machetes, we had knives, we had, even poisons. We have had any number of flamethrower in one case.
Oh yeah, explosives in Bath, Michigan too.
Yeah.
So we have a whole analysis of all the weapons used, but certainly guns comes up high on the list. Even in countries that don't have guns readily available, we did find some of these spree killers did manage to get them and use them.
That's interesting. Did you, I saw you did a documentary about Charles Whitman. What is it about his case that makes him stand out from other cases?
Well, Whitman, I mean, most people think of him as a mass murderer, and sometimes they call him, because it was 1966,
right.
They call him sort of the first one in a wave of others. But he wasn't really. It was Howard Unruh, the first modern mass murderer. But Whitman, we put him in the category of mixed type. He is, in fact, a spree turned mass killer, because he killed in 3 locations. He first murdered his mother and then his wife the night before. He took all his munitions and supplies and whatnot up to the tower at the University of Texas at Austin to start picking off people below. So we tend to think of him as a mass murderer, but as we looked at the case, Mark and I both realized we did need a mixed category, because we do have, we have spree killers who become serial killers. We have serial killers and mass murderers become spree killers. So we definitely had some of these cases that were crossovers, and he's one of them. But he's interesting to me, I guess, in psychology, because the suicide note that he wrote, he also had signaled he was going to do this. He had talked it over with a campus psychologist and said that he was having these dreams and fantasies about shooting people from the tower. And those were the days before there was any kind of duty to warn laws, so that person didn't do anything with the information. He just thought the guy was venting.
Right,
but he wasn't.
Thought he was talking and not going to actually do it.
Right. And you know what? That's the fact. Most people do exactly that. I mean, I've been a counselor. Right. I like being a counselor, but I have been, and certainly venting goes on all the time. And so it's difficult at times to know when you should do something, but that as a result of some of these earlier cases, we now have a lot more safeguards in place for mental health experts to consult with one another, to look at guidelines. We do have laws now for duty to warn or duty to protect, depending on what state you're in. But so with him, though, he wrote a suicide note that indicated he thought there was something wrong with his brain, and indeed there was a tumor near the emotional center, the limbic system. And there'll be people, and I've heard criminologists say, well, that didn't cause him to do this. No, it did not cause him to do this. But there's little doubt that it was influential. And we can't dismiss that, because he had this headaches and this free-floating sense that something was wrong, and he was irritable, and things just weren't going well. He was trained in the military, and had an abusive father. So there are a lot of factors that go into what ultimately a person ends up doing. And you can't discount that was one of those factors. Can't say that a brain tumor caused him to do it at all. But you can certainly say it did have some effect.
Right, you can't count it out for something.
You can't count it out, absolutely.
It's, I thought that documentary you were on that Chris referenced was really good. I'd not seen that before, but a lot of things I didn't know about Whitman, and that's why we've decided to do something on him here after the Spree Killer episode. And we hear more about the active shooters now with the 24/7 news, but do you think they are more common, or is that only the perception just because we hear about things? And then, of course, social media as well. People have news instantly. But do you think they're more common now, or is it just coincidental?
No, they're certainly more common. In part because I remember I was teaching this in a class once, and I think it was right after 2008 when the economy tanked and everybody
Yeah.
and all this stuff was happening, and I said, you watch, there are going to be more of these, because what happens, I think, this is my theory, is that certain mentally unstable people tend to absorb collective social tension, and then they act out, and they often will act out depending on what they've seen in different media things, whether they're watching, true crime documentaries, or they're watching the news, or they're, reading books like mine, who knows.
Right.
But they see a way to act out and perhaps relieve the tension and maybe get some fame. Sometimes that's what is part of what can drive some of them. But they act out. And I think when you have one that's successful, that seems to have gotten a lot of attention, you'll get others in kind of a chain reaction to that. Right. Certainly with the school shootings, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Some of these are simply, they were inspired by someone else. And in fact, some of them have even said so. Sure. I can do better than him. I want to do it like that. And they romanticize it. That's sort of the kids' version of it. But if there are agendas, a mission, I mean, we have an entire category of these spree killers that we call mission-oriented. Some of them are mentally ill. Some of them have terrorist agendas. Some of them are just hate-filled people who want to lash out. And I think the New Zealand incident, I can't remember the guy's name, but when he went to Christchurch and he wanted to go into the temples and wipe out these people. And that's another good example, because he stupidly put this video up.
That's not very smart.
If you have police officers who know what they're doing and figure out the mission mindset, they can immediately figure out where might this person go next. And so, his downfall, he wanted to make a big splash, but his downfall was stupidly putting it on a video and basically saying, this is what I'm doing, come and get me.
Yeah.
So that's another good example of what we're trying to say, is that these spree killers, law enforcement can get ready for them. And when they have either an anger-targeted type of killer that is like Dwight Layman Jones, who had clear targets and a list of people he was angry at, or you have these mission mindsets, it's easier to figure out to anticipate where they're going and what they might do next. So that too is a good case.
That's very interesting. Is it common for spree killers to commit suicide after they commit their crimes, or even suicide by cop or something like that? Is it?
Yeah. Yes. And we ran a whole study, because I'm a suicidologist, so I'm always interested in the suicide angle of things. So we did, part of our analytics was on the whole suicide question, in part because in my opinion, of the three categories, you have mass murderers who kill 4 or more people in basically a single incident, or closely related locations. A spree killer who strings it out a little more in terms of geography or time, or both, and serial killers who are basically motivated in a very different way than either of those two. So I kind of see spree killers as being mass murderers strung out, across time, place. And in that case, most mass murders either are suicidal or do commit suicide either at the scene or later in their cells, or after they can get convicted or something like that. They do tend to have suicidal intentions, because everybody knows who they are. There's no hiding it. They're basically trapped. We do have some who turn themselves in, but often they will commit suicide or hope they'll get killed by police. So spree killers would have a lot of that same mentality, and that's certainly what we saw. That we saw a lot of suicides, not as many, I think, as we expected to see. But certainly we also saw them getting into scraps at the end of their sprees. Like Dwight Layman Jones is a good example, where when the police cornered him, initially he was going to shoot it out, but then he killed himself. And we've had a few more like that who waited until they were cornered and then, either shot themselves or put themselves in a situation where the police would shoot them.
Interesting. What is it about killers like Charles Starkweather that become romanticized with movies like Natural Born Killers? Do you think it was the fact that he had Carol Ann with him, the female accomplice? It kind of makes it like a very romanticized, albeit gory and gruesome, but like somewhat romanticized. Yeah, Bonnie and Clyde.
Well, I mean, it was kind of romantic for Starkweather himself.
Sure.
He's the prototypical spree killer. Like, when you think of spree killer, it used to be that's the guy you'd think of.
Right.
And in many ways, he saw himself as her, deliverer. He went and killed her family. They played house together for a week. He had the first murder he committed even before his spree was so that makes him a sort of a serial killer turned spree killer.
Right.
So the murder he committed was so he could buy her presents because he robbed a gas station and killed the gas station attendant.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a way, his whole thing had romantic overtones because even as they were killing people across the way, and I have a personal thing with this because my college mentor's brother was Robert Jensen, who was the kid who picked him up hitchhiking and ended up with his girlfriend shot and dumped into a storm cellar.
Oh,
so that's something I've always had this, ever since college.
Interesting.
I've been aware, and then my mentor committed suicide.
Oh my gosh.
So Starkweather had reverberations throughout that family, and several members of that family committed suicide, the Jensen family. And the Robert Jensen case was the one that they tried Starkweather on, so it was pretty horrifying for all involved. But still, in his mind, it was kind of a suicidal run. If he didn't make it, okay. But if he did, they were going to go find a place, isolated where they could be together forever. And she was, the one who was with him on this. And frankly, I honestly think that her whole defense, I know she's still alive and I should probably not say this, but she had ways to get away from him. There was an entire week there.
Definitely.
There were times when he was asleep. There was time for her to have done something. And when she spoke about her involvement later, you could tell she was sophisticated enough to know what she was doing and then to turn on him. So she easily could have turned on him before. She wasn't in terror of her life. And he even suggested she might have been involved in the Jensen murder with his sister, his fiance,
right,
Carol. So, maybe, she certainly disavows that to this day. I personally am skeptical of some of the claims she's made since then, because I think when you really look at that whole spree, it isn't that I think she was altogether, let's kill people together, like you see with Natural Born Killers or some of these other shows that are supposedly based on them. I don't think at all she wanted him to kill her family, and I don't think she was very enthused about other people he killed. But nevertheless, I think she went along with him. Who knows? Maybe she just thought she had nothing left.
That was her life now, basically.
Yeah, I don't know. But in a way, the reason I think it gets romanticized is because it for him, it was romantic. He was her protector. He was going to make a life for them together by killing these people and stealing from them and finding a way to get where they could be, where nobody would find them. That was kind of an absurd notion, but he wasn't a very bright guy.
Right.
And that makes a lot of sense, too. And we have an episode coming up on Israel Keys. The way he was able to live completely separate lives with his family while he was out committing his crimes is very interesting. Like BTK and Gacy did the same thing, basically. What is it about them that they're able to do that and just separate the two completely?
Well, basically, all the people you've named are psychopaths. So
Pretty much psychopaths. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah.
that's the first one. In fact, I spent 5 years with Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, writing his criminal autobiography. And one of the concepts that he came up with, that he still thinks I came up with, but was really him, it was called cubing. And it's the idea that you have multiple sides. We are all cubes, and we have multiple sides that we can be on. With someone like Israel Keys, Bundy, Gacy, Rader, they're not very rooted in their sense of identity. So on these sides, so one is a husband, father, killer, thief, liar, churchgoer.
Right.
So each of the has its role, and they can uproot quickly from any given face and go to the next one, depending on what the situation calls for, much more easily than most of the rest of us, because most of us are pretty rooted in our sense of identity and a sense of integrity, so that if we do something that's uncharacteristic or contradictory to what our moral beliefs are, we feel it. We're like, oh, eek, why did I do that? These people don't feel it. They don't feel it at all. They just use whatever they need to use to get what they need for themselves, because essentially they're narcissistic, which makes them very adept at being manipulative, as well as very adept at being able to pass as whatever they need to be to get what they want. So they just hone this from a pretty young age. I mean, Israel Keys, when they arrested him, said, "I've been two people for," I think he said, 12 years.
Right.
Ray very, very easily showed how much of this came out of some of his experiences in childhood and adolescence. So did Bundy, as a matter of fact. Kemper, Gacy, I mean, you can go on and show from their developmental trajectory how they developed these ways of passing while also keeping this very, very heated secret life that was more alive for them than anything they were doing by day. So Rader can get up in court and say something like, to call his family, his social obligations or connections, right, as like, what? I'm your daughter. I'm your social obligation. Well, he can do that because when he's on the face where now he's the serial killer recounting his cases to the judge, the rest of his life, his roles recede. They go on the other sides of the cube. And I thought that was great. And it's sort of the idea of compartmentalizing, but it's easier to spell. And I think it's much more visual. I think the metaphor works much better than compartmentalize, which describes very distinct compartments. And I don't think they are distinct. I think it's one person who can pivot to the next face however he needs it, he or she, because they're not deeply emotionally rooted in any one identity. And so they can move into any of them at a moment's notice, depending on what they think they need.
That is interesting. Have you talked to Dennis Rader lately?
Yeah. I had a note from him last month.
Okay. I thought when we talked last time, you said you had still been in touch with them. I was just curious since you brought it up. Very cool.
Yep. Yeah, because I think we're now working on potential for turning the book into something.
Great.
That'd be cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that book. Another serial killer we're going to be covering is one of these lesser known ones to the general populace would be Robert Berdella, the Kansas City butcher. What do you feel is the reason why cases like his tend to not be as prevalent in the, true crime circles as others? I mean, he was absolutely horrific, kept diaries of it and very meticulous records, and just an incredible story, but almost unheard of to the average person.
Yeah, I think in some ways it has to do with who got which books when and with which publishers, honestly. I think his case, first of all, his victims were gay, or I mean, he was gay, so I don't think his victims all were, but he was. Second, we don't even know who they all are, because he disposed of some by putting them in the trash, or so we don't have that big, like Gacy had 28 men buried in his house.
Sure.
Or Don had all kinds of bodies and body parts in his apartment. So they stand out in ways that he just doesn't, even though he kept meticulous records, and he was, pretty horrifying in his torture of his victims. I think that there are a number of factors that just ended up, not propelling him to fame in the way, and even today probably wouldn't, in the way that some of these others have been. So it's usually a mix of things. And once he doesn't make it to the stratosphere of serial killers, it's hard to push him there unless something is suddenly discovered that we didn't know before, like with his body dumping ground, and suddenly there's 30 victims there, something like that.
Gotcha.
I just think because of the way he disposed of them, and then he also died. There wasn't any big trial, right? Didn't he die before trial or something?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. So that also has an impact. When you get a big splashy trial like Bundy did and Gacy did, that
right, it's all over the news everywhere.
Yeah, and Berdella did not get big international coverage. I remember when I first saw his case, it was like some paperback true crime book. It wasn't even a big, best-selling book of any kind.
Right.
So he's always interesting to criminologists. He's interesting for research. He represents a certain type of sadist, but I could see why he didn't really make it to the big times.
Interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, here's something really interesting. I've heard that you are involved with a TV show about flipping houses where murders have occurred. Can you tell us about that and like where people can find it? Because that's super,
that's awesome.
super. Yeah, I definitely want to check that out.
Yeah, well, that was my initial brainchild. Let me just say
that's awesome.
About the origins, it occurred. We actually didn't end up flipping the houses, but we retained the name. It's really a murder house makeover show.
Okay.
However, because we realized we can't buy all these houses,
right?
It's inventory, right? Unless we have HGTV supporting us or something. But at any rate,
Chip and Joanna painting the blood-stained walls.
I was teaching a course on, mass murders and serial killers, extreme offenders, and I was talking about a local crime where I am, where two brothers and a cousin committed a triple homicide of, wiping out their family. And one of my students said, their house is for sale. And at around the same time, and I thought, wouldn't that be an interesting show? And around the same time, and I actually did call it Murder House Makeover. I had been working with a former executive producer of CSI, Josh Berman, on a variety of projects. And he said, send me some ideas, no matter what they look like. So tongue in cheek, I sent him Murder House Makeover, thinking he'd laugh. But he said, what? Tell me more. And so I wrote up a treatment, and we pitched this all over town in Hollywood, and everybody said this is one of the most original ideas we've seen in a long time. But still, the sort of the top tier of decision makers either didn't get it or thought that's not for us. Like, there were a few who really wanted to make a deal. It didn't go there. So it took us some time, back and forth, and then Quibi, which is for Quick Bites, is a streaming service, a new streaming service from Jeffrey Katzenberg, supported fully by Steven Spielberg. And he's got a partner who used to manage the marketing for eBay. Meg Whitman, I think is her name. Anyway, so they were developing this streaming service that's like other streaming services, but it's specifically for the phone. So it had a very unique type of design, and they bought They wanted us to make 4 houses to make over where murders had happened. And each of the houses would get 3 episodes. So Quibi is quick bite, meaning you get a 5 to 7 minute piece.
I actually think I might have that app on my phone, honestly.
Oh, well, then look up Murder House Flip, because
definitely.
And so 12 episodes, 3 episodes per house. And one of the ones that I had proposed was the Dorothy Puente house, which
all right.
Yeah, so she was a woman who took in boarders, killed them, buried them in her garden.
Right.
She had 7 bodies at one point when they finally did the investigation. So the homeowners, they really didn't want a makeover because they kind of liked the notoriety of their house. So I suggested, well, maybe you want a new garden.
Oh, wow.
That's a good suggestion.
I tell you, one thing, I'm just an executive producer, so I'm not part of the whole design crew, but I'm going to tell you that when you see the makeovers these people get,
oh, wow.
I'm afraid we're going to, I would be like, hey, how can I get one of those? Do I have to kill somebody?
There you go. You got to do 20 years, but you get your house made over when you get out.
Got a spectacular whole new yard and all kinds of stuff that went with it. It was amazing. And then we had some other ones. One was a guy who had killed and dismembered his wife in their bathroom. We found blood under the tiles still from that murder. He was cooking her when the police actually came.
Oh, wow.
So that was a really gruesome one. There was a murder, suicide, in another house. So essentially, we were looking for houses. Mostly, we kept them in California because of costs and whatnot.
Right, location.
Just to see how it goes. Now we're approved for a 2nd season, so we're actually casting about who has a murder house that
That's awesome.
we could look at, and so we're looking at, and obviously the more infamous the better. So the Dorothy Puente house was a good one.
Well, right here in our hometown, David Hendrick's house just came up for sale.
Yeah, he was acquitted and found guilty, then later acquitted. But he was in Central Illinois, supposedly killed his wife and 3 kids with an axe. And that house is on the market right now. That's what made us think to ask you that question.
Well, and what we would do is if the owners want a makeover, now they might, at this point, if it's on the market, they might just say no, unless they can't sell it. They might say yes, because what happens with these murder houses, they're called stigmatized properties, is they often go for much less than they could go for because of the murder aura. So the whole point of Murder House Flip is that we're healing the house by completely making over the site in a way that erases the memories of the murder and gives people their house back. So people who are actually in the process of wanting to sell one of these houses might be interested in a makeover because it would up the value of the house by far. I mean, they pay nothing for getting this done. And it can certainly up the value, just like you see on HGTV. I'm not sure most of that
happens a lot.
Isn't just fake, but ours is not fake because we really renovated these homes. And I'm telling you, our design team was astonishing.
That's amazing. I'll have to check that out.
Of every single one. And if you'll have to tell me when you watch it what you think.
All right.
I'll
definitely be watching it.
Some of these things were.
That's awesome. Now, Dr. Ramsland, you mentioned a new book you've got out or coming out called How to Catch a Killer, and it sounds very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Yes, that actually just came out this week, and it is 30 cases of serial killers, and I have categories of the ways they were caught. One is forensic innovation. So in response to a case, there was a forensic innovation that helped to solve it. Another is, persistent, solid police work.
Another is the killers making an error. Another was witness reports, because that's really what their downfall was. And then the final category is self-surrender, where they turn themselves in, and that doesn't have very many in it.
I'm sure that doesn't
They
have
don't do
many
that
at
very
all,
often,
yeah.
but sometimes they do. And each case has, what happened, how they were caught, and then a takeaway. What do we learn from this? What do we, why this killer? So there's a variety. I think there are 3 females. There are some from other countries. Some are really gruesome. Obviously, you'll get the Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer. You'll get all those cases. But there's some are unique that you might not have heard of, like the guy in Japan who was finding his victims on suicide sites, where he was finding young women who were asking for help committing suicide, or for someone to join them in a suicide pact.
Oh,
He
wow.
would say yes, he would do that, and then he would kill them.
Jeez.
So that was unusual, very unusual. He got
Yeah,
9.
that is kind of unusual.
Yeah, so I wanted to find not just the typical cases,
Right.
which you would expect to see, but also some really unusual, unique cases.
Very interesting. Check that one out for sure.
Yeah, definitely going to have to check that book. And you said it just came out this week, right?
Just came out. Yep.
Awesome. Can you let our listeners know how they can find out more about you and social media sites or whatever like that?
Yeah, I tend to stay a lot on Facebook. I manage several pages on that, and I have kind of a social life there, I guess. I let go of my website because it was time consuming. I'd rather be writing than managing
Right,
websites. So
right.
let that go. And I have a few like Twitter and stuff, but I really do every day I'm on Facebook posting interesting things about crime or beautiful pictures or funny things that amuse me. And so I go on often. It's very easy to find me, and I say yes to, if there's some sense, like I won't say yes to anybody because obviously there's a lot of bots and stuff out there as well. But,
Obviously, right.
if you have any sense of, being friends of a friend or something, I will definitely take you on. And I have a fans of Katherine Ramsland page. I have several pages, a haunted crime scenes page, if you like that kind of thing. So
I love the pictures of you with the fish that are bigger than you. I'd like to know how in the world you got to be really strong to be able to hold some of these fish up.
I actually, and that one was I think a 38-inch carp. And it was a big, fat, really, really huge. It was
Wow.
the biggest one of that summer. So I was the carp queen for sure that summer. And my hand was hurt, so that made it even harder to bring it in.
Gosh. Wow.
But yeah, that's a big one year we didn't get, we only got maybe 20 inchers. So I used a Barbie doll and I put her here's my big fish.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, you are an incredibly busy person. It just blows my mind. And every time I turn on a true crime documentary and I see you, I think, my gosh, I don't know how you even eat and sleep, but very impressive.
I do. I'm one of those people for whom this whole pandemic hasn't affected my life that much. Because I'm always working at home, and that doesn't matter to me.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ramsland, for doing this interview with us and Murder Metal Mayhem. We really do appreciate it, and you've always got some very interesting insights. And good luck with the new book and everything you're doing. And come back again sometime soon.
Okay, thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Katherine.
Bye.
Bye.
Mother, man.